Nancy Pelosi, the highest-ranking elected woman in US history, second in line to succession to the presidency, multi-millionaire, Speaker for the House of Representatives, and represents most of San Francisco in California. She's an important woman in US politics and a noteworthy woman of significance, and it's interesting that the position she is in has a lot of symbology that she may not even be aware of. Before delving into symbology, let's look at the significance of her and San Francisco to see why there may be important symbology and subtly hint as to what the behind-the-scenes plan may be. Now, you might not expect a liberal, a Democrat, a politician representing the Center for LGBT, arts, and round the corner from Silicon Valley to be very religious. However, she does publicly identify herself as Catholic and has even stated that the spirit of St. Francis is guiding her, whatever that means. She also seems sensitive to criticism around her faith and whether she's a true and active Christian or not. Despite this, she does have a liberal interpretation of the Bible and its doctrines, for example, supporting gay marriage, despite it being against the doctrines of her own church. Here she appears to put personal ideology above factual doctrine that is biblically evidenced and accepted by her own church. Her ideology fits in well with her city and is therefore convenient for her political job. This is a quote from St. Francis of Assisi. "If I saw an angel and a priest, I would bow my knee to the priest and then the angel." The question is, no matter how well-intentioned Francis of Assisi was he not putting the church, the human-formed structure that calls itself the church, above the actual facts of the faith that he's supposed to be following? Isn't this what Nancy is doing as well, bending the beliefs of the religion because the ideology of the political organization she works for is more important? In that way, she is working in the spirit of Francis of Assisi. San Francisco is a very significant city in America. The meaning in English is St. Francis, which also happens to be the name of the current pope. But for both, it's thought to have come from Francis of Assisi. However, there is another famous St. Francis known as St. Francis Xavier. Let's follow what they say, and that it's from St. Francis of Assisi. It's interesting that the city waited until the year 1969 to twin itself with the city of Assisi in Italy, which is where St. Francis is from. Now, occultists use 9s and 6s interchangeably, because the numbers are just considered to be the upside-down versions of the other. San Francisco is also famous as the birthplace of the United Nations, and is the center of liberality and gay rights. Earthquakes are important. The Bible tells us to investigate them as a sign of the end. In 1906, San Francisco suffered a devastating earthquake and subsequent fire that destroyed 80% of the city. It was then quickly rebuilt using loans from the Bank of Italy. This bank later became the Bank of America. Jack London was quoted after the earthquake as saying, "Not in history has a modern imperial city been so completely destroyed." Well, this statement could be said to be accurate because he used the term modern. Because the Lisbon earthquake and fire of 1755 completely destroyed the city. It was then quickly restored. The Lisbon fire happened to be on All Saints' Day in the morning, when many people were at church lighting the candles, which would then topple over from the earthquake and burn down the city. It seems as if God wasn't pleased with either Lisbon or San Francisco. However, in both cases, their stores of worldly wealth allowed them to quickly rebuild. Lisbon had huge stores of gold that they had taken from South America. San Francisco had actually been first populated by the gold rush by people who wanted to get rich quick. Both cities are therefore linked with gold, At the end of the 20s was the start of the Great Depression, and surprisingly, San Francisco did quite well during this period, and not a single of its banks failed. And the Golden Gate Bridge, the iconic image of San Francisco during the 30s, was built. This bridge is now the second most common place in the world to commit suicide. It makes you wonder if the money that was used to build these projects was actually cursed. Was it in fact black money from ill-gotten gains spent on projects of vanity? Despite it having America's highest quality of living and being the third richest city in America, it's well known for homelessness. Is this money controlled by those who are truly wise and loving, or is this money controlled by those cursed and deceived by man's wisdom? In 1989, the next major earthquake in San Francisco occurred, and it occurred as the scene was being broadcast live due to a World Series game that was about to take place there. It's as if there was a willingness to reveal to the country that there may be anger placed on this city. We previously mentioned that in 1969, San Francisco twinned itself with Assisi in Italy, the home of St. Francis. In 1997, Assisi was then devastated by earthquakes, but it was then described as having a remarkable recovery and restoration, very similar to the description of the recovery of San Francisco. Now, if we look in Assisi, we see a temple to Minerva. She was the female goddess of wisdom. She was the Roman version of the goddess Athena. She was the goddess of arts, trade, and warfare. Now, wisdom could be described as the liberalism which is seen as a progression from the lower state of wisdom to a higher state. This is the progressive liberal doctrine. Warfare? Well, it was the birthplace of the United Nations and the place where the treaty was signed that ended the war with Japan. San Francisco is well known to be a city of arts. In terms of trade, it's a center of banking, a gold rush city, and its Bay Area is the software capital of the world. The link to Minerva is not a coincidence. The seal of California confirms it. Minerva is shown on their seal. There is also a bronze head bust of Minerva in the main library of the University of California, Berkeley. In 2007, Nancy Pelosi won the Minerva Award. Oprah Winfrey won it in 2010, and they are women who are portrayed as representatives or types of Minerva. The founder of the Minerva Awards said, "I'm looking for a namesake and symbol for these awards. I chose Minerva, the Roman goddess of 1,000 works, not only because she graces the California state seal, but also because she embodies what I believe to be truly heroic and feminine qualities." Maria Shriver, founder of the Minerva Awards. Great Britain uses the goddess Britannia to represent itself, and if we look at it, it looks identical to Minerva. We also see that the Queen of England has to dress up in a very similar way to Minerva. If we look at the pantheon of pagan gods, we see that Jupiter was the main god. Jupiter was known as Zeus in Greek mythology. Minerva represents the head of the gods. So the wisdom of the gods was seen as the feminine wisdom, despite the main god being male. A male leader can therefore use feminine wisdom to rule, and it may look therefore like a man is ruling, but because a feminine type of wisdom and thinking is actually controlling him, in a way a woman is ruling. And by being the mind of leaders, in a way she is shape-shifting into them because her mind and way of thinking and logic and wisdom is influencing their thoughts and decisions. In a way, Minerva becomes them. Now, leaders in America have been seen to go to the Bohemian Grove. The Bohemian Grove is based in San Francisco, and it's a gentleman's club. At this place, they worship an owl. Minerva is the owl of the Bohemian Grove, so they are likely unknowingly praying to a female goddess to give them her feminine wisdom. Minerva is also known as the Virgin, just as Mary, the mother of Jesus, is known as the Virgin Mary. What often happens is that pagan symbols and gods copy parts from characters in the Bible to create a false religion that's more likely to deceive because it mixes the error with truth. Alternative versions of Christianity can be created using alternative characters that say things that are more to the liking of liberal people who want to follow the doctrines from the modern wisdom of humans rather than the ancient wisdom of God. Many people will have heard the name Minerva from the Harry Potter series, where the professor is called Professor Minerva McGonagall. Harry Potter also has an owl as his personal pet. This owl is actually female, and in his school people are also awarded for good results by receiving something called owls. This emphasized again that the owl is a symbol of wisdom and knowledge. There are many other examples of Minerva being used to promote the ideology seen in San Francisco, such as the Swedish princess who was labelled as a Minerva of the North. She was Catholic and was said to have liberal values and to promote education. There were also rumours of lesbianism and intersexuality which would fit with the ideologies Minerva stands for. It does make you wonder why people who profess to be Christians label themselves after pagans who have the same traits and ideologies. You would have thought that having the same thinking as a pagan god would be a warning sign that your beliefs may not be so Christian. Going back to San Francisco, we see a green hill in the center known as Parnassus Heights. The University of California has a campus there known as the Parnassus campus. Now, Parnassus also happens to be named after a place of extremely important pagan significance. It's a mountain in Delphi, Greece, also known as a sacred place for Apollo, the half-brother of Minerva. Apollo spends time on Parnassus with his lovers, the Muses. Who are the Muses? They're the minor goddesses of the Greek pantheon, the personifications of literary, arts, music, visual arts, and science. The 9 Muses in Greek mythology have been an inspiration to artists since antiquity, and each muse was assigned expertise in a particular domain of the arts. Very fitting for San Francisco's hippie-style artistic culture. Apollo appears as the companion of the Muses, and as Musagetes, the leader of the Muses. He leads them in dance. They spend their time on Parnassus, which is one of their sacred places. Apollo is also the lover of the Muses, and by them he became the father of famous musicians like Orpheus and Linus. Apollo is a god of creative arts and music, but at Delphi he is the patron of foreigners and protector of fugitives and refugees, which is also very much how San Francisco sees itself, as being a city that fights on their behalf. Now, why is all this female symbolism being used? Well, if you do follow Satan, and I'm not saying that Nancy Pelosi follows Satan, but if you are someone who follows Satan, then you would believe his lies, especially the lie that he gave to Eve, that when Eve ate the apple and sinned against God, that she attained a higher level of wisdom and knowledge. Their belief is that she had therefore progressed to a higher state, an understanding that had previously been reserved only for God. A Satanist would therefore believe that what Eve did was clever and resulted in a superior state. It was the female that pulled us up to this more godly state, and you would then be thankful and look up to the women that follow Satan's lies. The story of Adam and Eve was in the past, but history repeats itself, and Satan wants the Eves of this world, and that's people, both men and women, who will listen to his deceptive lie about achieving a higher state of wisdom. Men and women can both work as Eves if they are willing to accept the thinking that she had. Now, Satan is a master deceiver and presents himself as an angel of light and is a copycat. So most people who are under the influence of Satan likely think that they're following loving, kind beliefs and that they're likely blessed by heaven. They're deceived because Satan knows that deception is the most successful way to ensnare people. I think it's very likely that Nancy Pelosi thinks that she's working for God, and that the ideology she has is progressing our wisdom to a higher state, and that she has the right, therefore, to be angry with those that can't see and agree with her advanced way of thinking. The arts in San Francisco are the same intoxicating celebrations that Balaam used to curse God's people in the Bible, and are also being used in San Francisco to corrupt their beliefs and behavior.